In the name of God, the holy and undivided Trinity. Amen. When we first meet Nicodemus, way back in the 3rd chapter of John's Gospel, when he sneaks in to visit Jesus at night and has the debate about being born from above, and he just doesn't seem to get it. John chapter 3 doesn't leave me with a lot of hope for Nicodemus, but he shows up twice more. He defends Jesus in the council and says we usually hear people when we have a grievance against them and are bringing charges against them. And then he shows up a 3rd time. After Jesus has died, he comes with Joseph of Arimathea to claim Jesus' body, to give him a burial, and he brings what seems like an excessive amount of spices for burial. That gives me hope for Nicodemus. I don't think his story ended in chapter 3. And I don't think it ended after the Passion. I suspect that Nicodemus continued to wrestle with the mysteries that he had encountered, with this man, Jesus, who he just didn't quite understand at first. And I suspect that is what many of us do. Of all the days on the calendar, Good Friday is the hardest. It's hard because we wrestle with the why. I have preached sermons in the past where I have teased out the absurdity of the whole situation and just acknowledged it doesn't make one bit of sense. I have often pointed out that Pilate's trajectory in the Gospels. In the earlier Gospels, Mark, for example, Pilate maybe a little neutral, maybe slightly the writer is suspicious of Pilate. As the Gospels get newer and newer, Pilate gets sparklier and sparklier. It is as if the gospel writers are trying to absolve him. By the time we get to John's gospel, probably finished sometime in the early 2nd century, Pilate starts to look like a squeaky clean Boy Scout. And I assure you, he was not. Not just because there were no Boy Scouts in ancient Rome, but because he was a brutal imperial official. He was nowhere near the nice guy that we see in John's Gospel. Which brings me to the point that crucifixion was a Roman execution. That as much as the 4th Gospel tries to lay this at the hands of the chief priests and the leaders of the Jewish people, at the end of the day, it was the Roman Empire that killed Jesus. I think the worst thing that we can do, and there is lots of historical precedent for this, is to miss the point of hearing the Passion Gospel from John's perspective. In medieval times, Christians would hear that, and they would rush out into the Jewish neighborhoods, wreaking havoc, bringing violence on their neighbors because they were Jewish. That is to miss the point of what we are hearing. Sometimes we look for someone to point the finger at. It's kind of easy for me to stand here and really want to say it's Pilate's fault. That's the guy. That's the one who did it. But I think that misses the point too. Because the point of hearing the Passion narrative twice during Holy Week, once on Palm Sunday from the Synoptic tradition and once on Good Friday from the Fourth Gospel, is for us to recognize that we miss the point any time we try to shift the blame. We miss the point if we pretend that Jesus would have fared any better in the empire of the United States than he did in the empire of the Romans. We miss the point when we look for someone else to blame and when we pretend that somehow we miss the blame, that it's not about us. But, to quote Woody Guthrie, if Jesus were to preach like he preached in Galilee, they'd lay Jesus Christ in his grave. We would do the same thing. I don't think we like to be challenged. I don't think we like to hear that there is a better way to live our lives. There is a better way for us to embrace this good news, to recognize that what we have in Jesus is an example, someone who gives us strength and gives us courage to live our lives in a new way, to speak out against the powers that would corrupt us and others, to speak out against the systems that grind people up just like so much raw material for the purposes of empire. We've been asked to look at this story. Here's the man, Pilate says. So I wonder, what do we see when we behold the man, when we look to Jesus? I am profoundly, not even convinced, I am profoundly moved in my spirit every time I hear Jesus say, "It is finished," his last words from the cross. And I take a great deal of hope in that, even on this day, even on the darkest day of the liturgical year. When Jesus says, "It is finished," I think he meant exactly that. The work is done. We have been renewed. We have been made whole. We have been brought into the loving embrace of the one who is changing us. We've been brought into the loving embrace of the one who calls to us to be the people we've always been meant to be, who calls out to us and invites us to find our true selves by following him along the way of the cross, to recognize that when we set aside agendas, programs, when we set aside our great, deep-rooted desire to be right at all costs, Lord, release me, set me free. When we set those things aside and look to Jesus, we begin to change. It is finished. We don't have to wait for another miracle. It is finished. We don't have to wait to be redeemed in the sweet by and by. It is finished. We are called to be the light of the world right now. Called to live in this new life right now. To be the people we were always meant to be. Amen.
Amen.